The rain had begun before dawn. Not the gentle sort that nourished gardens and filled rivers with silver reflections, but a cold, relentless rain that seemed determined to wash every trace of warmth from the world. It beat against the towering windows of Blackthorn Manor and drummed upon the ancient stone roofs with a mournful rhythm. Beyond the estate walls, the village roads had become rivers of mud, and the skeletal trees bent beneath the wind like old men burdened by grief. Inside the great manor, however, chandeliers blazed with golden light. Crystal sparkled. Silver gleamed. Laughter echoed through marble corridors. The wealthy celebrated while the poor endured another night of hunger. And in the vast kitchens beneath the manor, tragedy was about to collide with privilege. The first scream came shortly after sunset. "Thief!" The word cracked through the kitchen like a whip. Every servant froze. A copper pot slipped from a maid's hands and crashed against the stone floor. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Near the pantry entrance stood a young servant woman, her clothing soaked from rain and patched so many times that little of the original fabric remained. Her dark hair had escaped the confines of a faded headscarf, clinging damply to her cheeks. In her trembling hand was a single red apple. Nothing more. Just one apple. Yet the room stared at her as though she had stolen a crown. "There she is!" shouted the head cook. "I caught her leaving the pantry." The woman took a frightened step backward. "No," she whispered. "Please." Before she could speak further, 2 footmen seized her arms. The apple nearly slipped from her fingers. "Bring her before His Grace," someone barked. Within minutes, the entire kitchen erupted into chaos. Servants abandoned their duties. Footmen gathered. Housemaids whispered excitedly. Even several aristocratic guests passing through the manor paused to witness the spectacle. The accused woman was dragged into the center of the kitchen. Humiliation followed her like a shadow. Then came the children. 3 small figures emerged from behind a stack of flour sacks. The eldest boy could not have been older than 12. His shirt hung loosely upon his narrow frame. His cheeks were hollow. His eyes carried the weary look of someone far older than his years. Behind him stumbled a little girl with tangled hair and frightened eyes. A younger boy followed, clutching the hem of his mother's dress. The room fell strangely silent. The children were painfully thin. Too thin. The sort of thinness that came not from illness but from prolonged hunger. Yet even that sight failed to soften many hearts. One noblewoman standing near the doorway lifted a jeweled fan. "Good heavens," she murmured. "She brought them into the manor." Another laughed quietly. "The woman breeds children she cannot feed and then steals from her betters." Several guests chuckled. The servant woman lowered her gaze. The humiliation cut deeper than any blade. Still, she kept hold of the apple, as though letting go might somehow mean surrendering her children. Then the room shifted. A presence entered. Conversation died instantly. The Duke had arrived. Duke Adrian Blackthorn, master of the estate, one of the wealthiest men in England, a man whose reputation inspired obedience long before affection. He stepped through the crowd with measured confidence, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black velvet and dark embroidery. The firelight danced across the severe lines of his face. His expression revealed nothing. No anger, no pity, nothing at all. The crowd parted before him. Silence spread like frost. The Duke's gaze settled upon the woman, then upon the apple, then upon the children. The eldest boy instinctively stepped in front of his mother. It was a small gesture, yet something about it lingered. The boy was terrified. Everyone could see it, yet he still tried to protect her. Adrian noticed. He said nothing. The head cook stepped forward eagerly. "Your Grace, we found her stealing from the pantry." The Duke's eyes remained fixed on the woman. "Is that true?" Her lips trembled. For a moment she seemed unable to speak. Rainwater still dripped from her dress onto the stone floor. The little girl behind her began crying softly. The youngest boy wrapped both arms around her waist. At last the woman lifted her chin. There was fear in her eyes. But there was dignity too. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore, Your Grace." Her voice shook. "I took the apple." Whispers spread immediately. "A confession." The Duke remained motionless. "And why?" he asked. The question seemed simple. Yet it transformed the room. Everyone leaned forward. Waiting. Watching. Judging. Eleanor looked down at the apple. Then at her children. The sight nearly broke her. The eldest boy tried to appear strong. The younger children were already crying. Slowly, Eleanor fell to her knees. Gasps filled the kitchen. Not because kneeling was unusual, but because there was something devastating about the way she did it. Not as a criminal, not as a beggar, but as a mother who had reached the end of her strength. Tears filled her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't steal for myself." Silence. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the apple. "My children haven't eaten in days." The words shattered something invisible. The little girl buried her face against her mother's shoulder. The youngest boy began sobbing openly. The eldest stood rigidly still, trying desperately not to cry. For one brief moment, compassion threatened to enter the room. Then society remembered itself. A nobleman scoff. Another guest laugh. One aristocratic woman rolled her eyes dramatically. "Every thief has a story." More laughter followed. Cruel. Careless. Comfortable. Eleanor closed her eyes. Each laugh struck harder than the last. The Duke watched everything. Every whisper. Every tear. Every sneer. The fire crackled softly. Outside, rain battered the windows. Inside, a battle far more merciless unfolded. Adrian's gaze returned to the children. The eldest boy was quietly pulling the younger ones behind him, protecting them from the crowd, protecting them from shame. Something stirred unexpectedly within the Duke. A memory, a distant image from childhood. His own mother standing between him and a world determined to wound him. The feeling vanished almost immediately. Yet not entirely. The head cook cleared his throat. "Your Grace, shall we dismiss her at once?" Several servants nodded eagerly. One noblewoman smiled. Everyone expected the same outcome. A thief would be punished. The poor would return to their suffering. The world would continue exactly as it always had. The Duke remained silent. 1 second passed. Then another. Then another. The tension became unbearable. Finally, Adrian Blackthorne spoke. "The woman and her children will remain under my roof." The kitchen froze. Shock swept across every face. Even Eleanor stared upward in disbelief. The Duke's voice remained calm. "Until I learn the truth." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The noble guests exchanged stunned glances. The servants looked utterly bewildered. Eleanor's heart pounded violently. She did not understand. Neither did anyone else. But for the first time in many months, a tiny spark appeared in the darkness surrounding her life. Hope. And as the storm continued to rage beyond the manor walls, neither the frightened servant nor the cold-hearted Duke realized that a single stolen apple had just altered the course of both their destinies. The following morning arrived beneath a sky the color of pewter. Mist drifted across the sprawling grounds of Blackthorn Manor, softening the outlines of ancient oaks and stone walls. Frost glittered upon the gardens like scattered diamonds. Winter was approaching, and with it came a chill that settled deep within bones and hearts alike. Yet for the first time in many weeks, Eleanor Whitmore's children awoke with full stomach. The small servant chamber assigned to them was modest by noble standards, but to Eleanor it felt like a palace. A fire crackled gently in the hearth. Clean blankets covered the narrow bed. The children slept without shivering. She sat quietly beside the window, watching dawn creep across the estate. For a few precious moments they were safe. The thought alone nearly brought her to tears. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. An elderly housekeeper entered carrying a breakfast tray. Fresh bread, warm porridge, butter, tea. The scent filled the room instantly. Little Samuel, the youngest, opened his eyes first. His gaze fixed on the bread. Eleanor's heart broke. The boy stared as though he feared it might disappear. "Is it truly for us?" he whispered. The housekeeper smiled gently. "Every bit of it." The children approached the tray slowly, cautiously, as though food had become something magical and fragile. The eldest boy, Thomas, immediately divided the bread into equal portions. Even now he thought of others before himself. Eleanor watched silently as the children ate. Not quickly, not greedily, slowly, carefully. The habits of hunger lingered long after the hunger itself. Across the room, the old housekeeper discreetly wiped away a tear. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the manor, Duke Adrian Blackthorn stood beside a library window. Below him stretched the snow-dusted gardens. His thoughts remained fixed upon the woman who had stolen an apple. He had witnessed thieves before. Many of them. Most offered excuses. Most lied. Most begged. But Eleanor Whitmore had done none of those things. She had simply told the truth. And somehow that troubled him more than any deception. A knock sounded upon the library door. His steward entered. "The investigation has begun, Your Grace." Adrian nodded. "What have you learned?" The steward hesitated. "The villagers speak highly of her." That surprised him. "Continue." "Her husband died 3 years ago. A quarry collapse." The Duke remained silent. "Since then, she has worked wherever she could. Laundry. Sewing. Cleaning." The steward paused. "There are no reports of theft." The Duke turned toward the fire. "Interesting. Very interesting." By afternoon, Eleanor had been assigned work in the main kitchen. She expected suspicion, harsh treatment, cold stares. Instead, she found herself surrounded by curiosity. The younger kitchen maids watched her carefully. The cooks whispered when they thought she could not hear. Everyone knew she was the woman who had stolen from the Duke's pantry. Everyone also knew the Duke had allowed her to stay. No one understood why. Least of all Eleanor. She kept her head lowered and worked tirelessly. She scrubbed pots, prepared vegetables, swept floors, repaired torn aprons. When an elderly scullery maid struggled to carry water buckets, Eleanor quietly helped her. When another servant burned her hand, Eleanor fetched cool cloths. By evening, several servants who had distrusted her began viewing her differently. Kindness had a way of spreading, especially in places starved of it. The children, meanwhile, slowly began exploring the estate. The younger two were enchanted by everything. The size of the manor, the gardens, the horses, the endless corridors. Only Thomas remained cautious. Years of hardship had taught him that happiness rarely lasted. That afternoon, he found himself standing near the stables. A stable hand offered him an apple. Thomas froze. The sight of the fruit clearly unsettled him. The man smiled kindly. "It isn't stolen, lad." Thomas stared for a moment, then accepted it. Not for himself, for his younger siblings. The stable hand watched him run away and quietly shook his head. The boy carried responsibility far too heavy for his age. Several days passed. Snow began falling regularly. The manor transformed into a winter kingdom of white roofs and silver trees. And throughout those days, Adrian continued observing Eleanor. Never openly. Always from a distance. A glimpse through a doorway. A passing glance in a corridor. A moment from the library window. The more he watched, the more puzzled he became. She never complained. Never sought attention. Never attempted to gain favor. Even after long hours of labor, she spent every spare moment with her children, reading borrowed books, mending clothing, braiding her daughter's hair. The image lingered in his thoughts, far longer than it should have. Then came the first snowfall worthy of winter. The entire estate awoke beneath a blanket of white. Servants hurried about their duties. Guests admired the view. Children laughed outside. That evening, Eleanor returned to her room exhausted. The moment she opened the door, she stopped. A basket sat beside the hearth. Large. Beautifully arranged. Unexpected. Her children gathered around immediately. "What is it?" little Rose asked. Eleanor approached cautiously. Inside she found a folded wool coat. Dark blue. Warm and elegant. Beneath it were sturdy new shoes. One pair for each child. Perfectly sized. At the very bottom rested a delicate silver ribbon. The sort of ribbon a lady might wear. Eleanor stared. Speechless. There was no note. No explanation. No name. Thomas looked toward her. "Who sent it?" Eleanor gently touched the ribbon. She already suspected the answer. But she dared not speak it aloud. Across the manor, Adrian stood alone in his study. A faint smile touched his lips as snow drifted beyond the windows. For reasons he could not fully explain, seeing those children warm and safe brought him unexpected satisfaction. Unfortunately, not everyone shared his sentiment. By Christmas week, rumors had spread far beyond Blackthorn Manor. They traveled through drawing rooms, ballrooms, tea gatherings, country estates. The gossip grew more outrageous with each telling. Some claimed the Duke intended to marry a servant. Others insisted she had enchanted him. One particularly malicious rumor suggested the children were secretly his. Society feasted upon scandal, and scandal had arrived. The annual Christmas banquet only worsened matters. Nobles from across the county gathered beneath glittering chandeliers. Crystal glasses sparkled. Music filled the grand hall. Eleanor remained hidden among the serving staff. That had been her intention. Unfortunately, Lady Victoria Ashcombe had other plans. The wealthy widow enjoyed cruelty almost as much as she enjoyed attention. Halfway through the evening, she rose from her chair. A smile curved her painted lips. "My goodness," she announced loudly. "Has no one introduced us to the Duke's newest favorite?" The room instantly fell silent. Every eye turned toward Eleanor. Heat flooded her face. Lady Victoria continued. "Tell us, my dear, how many apples must one steal before becoming mistress of Blackthorn Manor?" Laughter erupted. Cruel. Sharp. Merciless. Eleanor stood frozen. Humiliation swept over her once more. Then a chair scraped against marble. The sound silenced the room. Adrian Blackthorn had risen. His expression was colder than winter itself. The laughter died immediately. No one dared move. The Duke's gaze settled upon Lady Victoria, then upon the assembled guests. Finally, he spoke. "The measure of a woman is not the title before her name." His voice carried effortlessly through the hall. "But the sacrifices she makes when no one is watching." Silence followed. Absolute silence. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. Lady Victoria's smile vanished. And for the first time all evening, Eleanor felt protected. Not pitied. Not rescued. Protected. Later that night, long after the guests retired, Adrian sat alone in his study. The fire burned low. Snow drifted beyond the windows. A collection of old estate records lay spread across his desk. One document had captured his attention. A faded report concerning a quarry disaster from years earlier. A disaster connected to Eleanor's late husband. The more Adrian read, the darker his expression became. Something about the report felt wrong. Very wrong. Then he found a hidden letter tucked between the pages. As his eyes scanned the contents, shock rippled through him. The truth buried within those papers had the power to change everything. And when dawn arrived, neither he nor Eleanor would be living in the same world they had known the day before. Snow fell steadily beyond the manor windows. It drifted across the grounds in soft white curtains, covering the world in a deceptive beauty. From a distance, Blackthorn Manor appeared peaceful, untouched by suffering or scandal. The great house glowed beneath winter lanterns, its towers rising proudly against the gray sky. Yet beneath that elegant exterior, old secrets were beginning to awaken. 3 days had passed since the Christmas banquet. 3 days since Duke Adrian Blackthorn had publicly defended Eleanor Whitmore before some of England's most powerful aristocrats. The county had not stopped talking about it. If anything, the gossip had grown worse. Every carriage leaving the estate carried new rumors. Every drawing room repeated the story. Every noble household discussed the mysterious servant who had somehow earned the Duke's protection. Eleanor knew none of this directly, but she felt its consequences. Whispers followed her through corridors. Guests stared openly when she passed. Even some servants watched her differently now. Not with contempt, with curiosity, as though she had become a puzzle nobody could solve. She hated it. Attention had never brought anything good into her life. That morning she stood in the laundry room folding linens while her thoughts remained fixed on her children. They were happier now. Healthier. Little Rose's cheeks had regained color. Samuel laughed more often. Even Thomas seemed less burdened. For their sake, Eleanor was grateful. Yet deep inside, fear lingered. Because happiness had always proven temporary. And temporary things were dangerous. Especially hope. Elsewhere in the manor, Adrian sat alone in his study. The faded quarry documents remained spread across his desk. The letter he had discovered rested beside them. He had read it 6 times. Each reading deepened his anger. The quarry collapse that had killed Eleanor's husband had never been an accident. At least not entirely. The documents revealed something far darker. The quarry's owners had ignored multiple warnings regarding structural damage. Repairs had been postponed. Profits had been prioritized. Lives had been risked. And when disaster struck, powerful men buried the evidence. The dead received blame. The wealthy received protection. Justice received silence. Adrian stared into the fire. Among the names mentioned in the documents were men he knew. Men who still attended Parliament. Men welcomed into noble society. Men who toasted one another beneath crystal chandeliers. The realization disgusted him. Then came the detail that refused to leave his mind. Eleanor's husband, James Whitmore. According to witness statements, he had not died trying to save himself. He had died returning into the collapsing quarry to rescue trapped workers. Several men survived because of him. Yet history remembered none of it. No monument. No recognition. No compensation. Nothing. Only a widow and 3 starving children. Adrian closed his eyes. Something within him shifted. Something he had spent years keeping buried. Guilt. Not for the disaster itself, but for belonging to a world that allowed such things to happen. That afternoon he requested a private meeting. When Eleanor received the message, anxiety immediately tightened her chest. She had been summoned to the library. Alone. The request terrified her. Had she done something wrong? Had the investigation concluded? Would she finally be dismissed? The questions followed her all the way to the great oak doors. A servant opened them. The vast library stretched before her. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling. Firelight danced across polished wood. Snow drifted beyond tall windows. And beside one of those windows stood Adrian Blackthorne. He turned as she entered. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt strangely intimate. "Your Grace." Eleanor lowered her gaze respectfully. Adrian motioned toward a nearby chair. "Please sit." The invitation startled her. Servants were rarely invited to sit in the presence of nobility. Nevertheless, she obeyed. The Duke remained standing. His expression was unusually serious. At last he spoke. "I have learned the truth about your husband." Eleanor's breath caught. For several seconds she simply stared. No one ever spoke about James anymore. The world had forgotten him. Forgotten everything. "What truth?" she asked quietly. Adrian approached the fireplace. The quarry collapse was preventable. The word struck her like lightning. Her hands tightened instinctively. "What?" The owners ignored warnings. His voice grew colder. Repairs were delayed to preserve profits. Eleanor felt the room spin. Years of grief. Years of questions. Years of wondering why fate had been so cruel. And now this. The fire crackled softly. Neither moved. Finally Adrian continued. "And your husband died saving others." The tears arrived instantly. Eleanor covered her mouth. For years she had clung to that belief. Yet nobody had ever confirmed it. Villagers spoke in whispers. Officials dismissed the stories. Eventually even she had begun doubting herself. Now the truth stood before her. Solid. Undeniable. Real. The first sob escaped before she could stop it. She turned away. Ashamed. Embarrassed. But grief ignored dignity. It had waited too many years. Adrian watched silently. Every instinct told him to maintain distance, to remain the composed aristocrat society expected. Instead, he crossed the room. Removing a handkerchief from his pocket, he offered it quietly. The gesture was simple, yet Eleanor stared at it as though it were something precious. Slowly she accepted. "Thank you." Her voice trembled. The Duke sat opposite her. For the first time, he noticed how exhausted she truly looked. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent years carrying unbearable weight alone. "What happened after his death?" he asked. The question opened a wound. Eleanor stared into the flames. For several moments she seemed uncertain whether to answer. Then the words began. Slowly, painfully, honestly. "We lost the cottage first." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The savings disappeared within months." She swallowed hard. "I sold my wedding ring." Another pause. "Then my mother's jewelry." The room grew quieter. Outside, snow tapped softly against the glass. "My relatives refused to help." Tears filled her eyes again. "They said 3 children were too much responsibility." Adrian listened. Every word deepened his understanding. And his anger. "I worked wherever I could." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Some weeks there was enough food." She looked downward. "Most weeks there wasn't." For a moment neither spoke. Then Eleanor whispered the truth she had never shared aloud. The hardest part was not being hungry. Adrian frowned slightly. What was it? Her eyes closed. Watching them be hungry. Silence followed. Heavy. Heartbreaking. Absolute. The firelight flickered across her tear-stained face. For the first time in years, someone had allowed her to tell the whole story. Not as gossip. Not as scandal. As truth. Adrian felt something tighten painfully within his chest. "You endured all of that alone." Eleanor managed a faint smile. "What choice did I have?" The Duke studied her quietly. Then he spoke words neither expected. "I have never met anyone with your courage." She looked up sharply. Shock filled her expression. No one had ever called her courageous. Desperate. Poor. Pitiful. Certainly. But not courageous. The compliment affected her more than it should have. And that frightened her. Because kindness was becoming dangerous. The room suddenly felt too warm. Too intimate. Too fragile. At last she spoke. "The world taught me to survive, Your Grace." Adrian held her gaze. "And what am I teaching you?" A sad smile touched her lips. Something vulnerable appeared in her eyes. Something neither of them fully understood. To hope. The words lingered between them. Powerful. Terrifying. Beautiful. For several seconds neither looked away. Then Adrian rose. His decision had already been made. "I intend to restore your husband's honor." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "The truth will become public." His voice carried absolute certainty. "The men responsible will answer for what they did." She stared at him. Speechless. No one had ever fought for her before. No one. The realization nearly broke her heart. Yet even as hope began taking root, danger approached. Because later that same evening, a sealed letter arrived from London. The contents left Adrian standing motionless beside his desk. His enemies had discovered what he was doing, and they intended to stop him. By destroying everything he held dear. Including the woman whose courage had already begun changing his life forever. The winter storm arrived on the very morning Adrian Blackthorne's enemies made their final move. Snow swept across London in fierce white waves, rattling carriage windows and burying roads beneath drifting blankets of ice. The city appeared beautiful from a distance, yet beneath that beauty lay the same cruelty Eleanor Whitmore had battled her entire life. Inside Blackthorn House, aristocrats gathered for what many called a necessary correction. The Duke's growing campaign to expose the quarry scandal had angered powerful men. His continued protection of a servant had angered even more. Now they demanded a choice: his title, or Eleanor. The great assembly hall glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. Lords and investors filled the room. Their smiles were courteous, but their intentions were not. Meanwhile, several streets away, Eleanor sat alone beside a small fire. A letter rested in her lap. She had spent the entire night staring at it. Every rumor, every whisper, every cruel remark repeated itself within her mind. She knew exactly what society believed: that she was ruining him, that a servant had no place beside a duke, that Adrian Blackthorn would lose everything if he continued defending her. Tears filled her eyes. For weeks she had fought against hope. Now she understood why. Hope always carried the risk of loss. Thomas entered quietly. At 13, he had become remarkably observant. "Mother." Eleanor quickly folded the letter. But he had already seen the tears. "You are leaving, aren't you?" The question shattered what remained of her resolve. She pulled him into an embrace. Behind him, Rose and Samuel appeared in the doorway. The children understood immediately. Their faces fell. "We have to go?" Rose whispered. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead. "Your Grace has done more for us than anyone ever could." Her voice trembled. "And because of that, I cannot be the reason he loses everything." Before dawn, they departed. No farewell. No servants awakened. Only a quiet carriage moving into the storm. Left behind was a single letter. One final goodbye. Hours later, Adrian entered his study. The assembly would begin shortly. His opponents were already waiting. Then he saw the envelope. His expression darkened as he read. By the final line, his heart felt heavier than it had in years. She was gone. Without hesitation, he abandoned the meeting. Ignoring protests, ignoring advisors, ignoring every expectation placed upon him. For the first time in his life, Adrian Blackthorn chose his heart over society. The snowstorm worsened as his carriage raced through the countryside. Hours passed. Visibility vanished. Roads disappeared beneath ice. Yet he continued searching. Then, near sunset, he saw them. An abandoned chapel stood upon a lonely hill. Beside it waited a small carriage trapped in deep snow. Eleanor and the children huddled together against the bitter wind. Rose was shivering violently. Samuel's cheeks had turned pale from cold. Thomas stood protectively before them despite his own exhaustion. The sight struck Adrian harder than any accusation ever could. He immediately wrapped his coat around the children. Relief flooded Eleanor's face when she saw him. Yet sorrow remained. "You should not have come," she whispered. "I had no choice." Snowflakes settled upon his dark hair. His gaze never left hers. "You were leaving because of me. Because of what they would do to you." Adrian stepped closer. For the first time, all restraint vanished. "Years ago, a brave man saved my life without ever knowing my name." Eleanor looked at him in confusion. "The man was your husband." Her eyes widened. "And today," Adrian continued, his voice rough with emotion, "his wife saved my soul." The winter wind seemed to disappear. The world narrowed to a single moment. A single truth. A single choice. "If loving you costs me every title I possess," he said, "then I shall consider myself richer than any duke who ever lived." Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheek. The children stared in wonder. And beneath the falling snow, surrounded by nothing but honesty and hope, the walls society had built between them finally began to crumble. For the first time, neither future nor status mattered. Only the family standing together in the storm. And the promise that none of them would ever face the world alone again.